an excellent way to go for this audience, because the panel that we've managed to collect for this particular webinar has a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in learning development as practice managers, which is they take the thought leadership that's available and convert that into things that actually work in real life. So it's my great pleasure to introduce all of you to this 2-hour special, but also especially the 11 panelists who will be talking very soon. But before we begin, as you can see on the screen, we've got a Q&A box. If you want to ask questions, there is the chat. And also the drawing tools can be used, but use it on the slides where it is indicated the tools can be used. We have a Twitter back channel, which is LRNCafe, and we also have a hashtag, which is LRN Omnibus, if you want to use that. Okay, so we had about 165 registrations from 80 plus organizations. The list is there, so I'm really happy to see that we've got a whole variety of organizations coming as part of the webinar, and I am hoping that you will be able to join the interactive slides. So we've actually got a lot of slides where you can type in your answers and your opinion, so please do use that. For those who are not familiar about LearningCafe and Capability Cafe, it's a community of like-minded professionals who are forward-thinking and want to really take thought leadership and apply it to practice. And the way that LearningCafe and Capability Cafe works is by building capability through webinar discussions like this one, the Yarn conference that we hold twice a year, once in Sydney, once in Melbourne. We've got a blog magazine, coffee catch-ups. The next one's actually in Sydney is HR for Agile, and if you want to attend that, just go to our website. And we do have workshops that we run, especially on the next generation skills. The next webinar is on using Agile Scrum in human resources and learning. This is on 1st Feb on Thursday, and Shreya will just send you a link to that. So if you register for that, should be our first webinar in the new year. But I also just wanted to, just a few personal updates. Some of you may be aware, but not all, is that I've teamed up with David Hegarty and Robin Pittard, people I've known for quite some time and who have worked in the industry, for the past 20-25 years, and we are now learned, and we help organizations transform the way learning is delivered using an ecosystem view, but leveraging agile, human-centered design technology. If you do require any assistance with strategy, roadmaps, technology review, selection, applying Agile and Scrum to your projects, or Tin Can X API, do reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you. But let's begin the panel discussion. As you can see, we've got 4 panels: State of Enterprise Learning, which I'll be introducing very soon, Learning Design in Flux, the 2-Speed Technology Conundrum, and the Roadmap for L&D Professionals. So we've got 4 panels, and let's start with the first one. And as you can see, that just on, please feel free to use the toolbars. There is text and also a pen to write, polls and chat in the user interface. Okay, so let me just introduce 2 senior L&D leaders who I've known for a long time, and I was very keen to get on the panel for the State of Organizational Learning because Murray Howard from Lend-Lease is at the moment, essentially scripting the path at Lend-Lease, and also we've got Natalie Nunn. So Murray and Natalie, if you're there, if you want to say hello, that'll be fantastic.
Hi everyone, it's Marie. Good to chat.
Hello, it's Natalie. I hope you can hear me well as well. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Wonderful. And while you were doing that, the slides have come back, so that's fantastic. So before we begin talking to Natalie and Murray, let's talk about the one of the survey questions that you answered, this was about the spend on L&D, right? And 38% of you felt that it increased, about 50% or 49% said remain the same, and 13% said it'll decrease. So, a total of 62% said it's going to be the same, and or it's going to decrease. But a good number, 38% said it's going to increase. So I guess it's just one of those questions which is not very well qualified, but just give an indication of the mood of spending in learning. So I think I'll ask our panelists, starting with Natalie, just in terms of just in terms of the trends that you're seeing in your organization, but also outside. What's your views on the slide?
Thanks, Jeevan. Our budgets are going backwards, and we are being asked to do a great deal more with less. And this is in spite of, over the last 3 years, headcount growth north of 30%. So there's a recognition that so much of the learning that occurs in an organisation like ours happens in the field. So investing in a systematic way to provide our professionals with access to a range of rich experiences is so much part of what we do, and that incurs no direct cost. But at this stage of the game, we continue to work with the same number of team members. So that's not changing, definitely not increasing, but our budgets are contracting year on year and have done for the last 5.
Thanks, and we'll kind of a couple of questions here afterwards. But just moving on to kind of the next slide is this is kind of the learned model of the ecosystem view, in which we say that really learning and performance should be designed in a way that it connects with the different layers involved in this complex picture, which is including the business outcomes and the budgets. But there are layers, right? And what happens in organizations is that the layers are actually not aligned. So usually it might actually look like this, where maybe the solutions are not aligned to the business outcomes, and the technology has been pulled to one side, so it's kind of managing these complex layers within the organization. So while we go along, I will ask the panelists about the complexity of learning within the organizations, and whether have you seen that increasing. And the question I guess I have in mind is, do you feel learning is getting out of control, given that there's a lot more self-directed learning, numerous options available? So maybe starting with Murray. Murray, what's your feel about? Are you able to kind of get a handle on what's happening, or is it just becoming more challenging?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things actually you said, and I found it really interesting that you used the phrase control. I think as a learning and development profession, we are used to being in control of who it is we actually provide learning to, how that learning is received, how it's delivered, how it's costed, etc. I think in the world moving forward, and Natalie actually referred to it in terms of talking about the people out in the field, learning is now happening whether we like it or not. And I think we're actually seeing it's more about how do we actually help people who are kind of either coaching each other or creating their own learning, how do we help them do it better? And as Natalie said, give people access to learning, or help them kind of navigate a path through it. But I think the days of control are well and truly gone. That being said, I think in the areas of talent, that's one where it's talent development. I think it's being held quite tightly, and that makes sense. But otherwise, I think if you like the control, I think those days might be gone. Interested to see if others think the same.
Natalie, what are your views, and then kind of over to your slide too.
All right, thank you, Maria. I couldn't agree more. I think relinquishing control is a transition state for learning and development, or talent development, as we now call ourselves here at EY. I just want to give a little bit of context. So I've been working with EY for the last nearly 8 years in senior L&D roles, and what I notice is that many people join Big Four firms for the training, a robust curriculum that educates professionals for technical excellence. Doesn't matter which of the firms that you join, you have access to fascinating local and global clients facing genuinely complex problems. So our young professionals joining these firms have the opportunity to work with experts who are shaping markets, industries, technologies, and even societies. And so while these big professional services institutions continue to focus on technical excellence and compliance, our traditional assurance and tax services are being balanced by a growth of advisory and transaction services, the sort of stuff that Jeevan does. Now, at EY, our professionals require technical grounding in essential disciplines and consulting skills, but the content of their work, as Marie was pointing out, is so fluid that they also need to be able to experiment, reflect, learn and learn quickly. And you'll see here on the little slide that I've put together, it's characterising that shift that Marie described from learner-fed to learner-led. And at EY, there is a necessity to enable people to source their own learning. Everything that we're doing in traditional disciplines are being disrupted by technologies. So we have to reinvent constantly because our traditional services and our traditional business model is being disrupted. But even further to that, Jeevan mentioned thought leadership and adopting thought leadership. Being able to be learner-led it requires a community or a culture that creates the conditions for learners not only to be able to access their learning, but to in fact know what learning they require. So we have had regard to some of the thought leadership being produced by the Neuro Leadership Institute, and Aaron, I see you're on the phone, by Gartner, for the CEB component of Gartner, around performance management and development, and truly integrating career development and performance conversations that enable people to understand where they are, where they need to be in the short and the long term, and what learning and development experiences, coaching and formal learning they may be. So, Jeevan, there are a couple of other trends I'm observing, but I'll stop there and let Marie get a word in.
Thanks. But there's actually one that I don't want to cover, which is the shorter attention spans, and kind of just just wanted your views about how big is that a problem, because I actually don't see that problem going away. In fact, might become worse. So what's your view on that, Natalie? And then we'll move on to Marie's view on this.
I agree. This is just a reality of the world that we're living in, and any of you that have children will observe this phenomenon that we are consuming content in smaller and smaller chunks. We are moving from one piece of content to another. Learning, as I'm observing, is becoming genuinely democratised, and we are just serving ourselves with the learning that we feel we need. So, our learning and development function is obviously undergoing a transformation accordingly. But the wonderful technology that enables so much of what we can do at lower cost is contributing directly to this shorter attention span, and that is it's amplified with the competing demands on our time. So learning, I'm seeing, is increasingly consumed on the go in different forms and formats that is uniquely tailored to that individual. It's also meaning that learning is becoming to be focused on knowledge acquisition. So I think we still have a lot of work to do in enabling people to apply the knowledge that they are acquiring, and how we shift as organisations to make sense of experiences, to develop peer coaching skills, to deploy coaching, I think starts to address, and wrapped around by a robust career performance and development model that supports all that work, then they are some of the ways in which we can address this. But I do think that we need to be working across talent and hand in glove with business, which is one of my other trends down there around convergence. But yeah, Jeevan, it's a reality. We know it within ourselves and we see it among our people.
Thanks, Natalie, and over to you, Marie. I mean, it's attention span and time availability is an issue, but let's see how how Lynn-Lise is doing.
I think there's a couple of things just following on from what Natalie was saying. One is that we all know when we're at university, you know, the skill of being able to recount information and to really be able to, as I said, just replay what it is we'd read or seen, etc., was really of value. But that was usually at a time when their knowledge content was staying fairly stable. With the advent of, you know, kind of more social technologies, even such as Wikipedia, etc., what we're seeing is what we need to know is changing all of the time. So the short attention span is that I actually need to know this just right now, and it is at its most contemporary. Like, what is the latest piece of information I need to know? So I think that leads to the short attention span. One of the things I do see, though, is people keep saying, I understand I can go and get information and leveraging learning technology, but a little bit like we were saying, the deployment or that networking aspect or coming together of people, I still hear a lot of requests for that. So I think it's how we actually flip that around. So gone are the days of probably, you know, the 5-day residential workshop, but there is a role that networking and sharing and as we were saying, kind of almost practicing of the skills, I think, has to play. A little bit of a talk about Lend-Lease. It's been interesting for me. I've been in the HR and then now the L&D transformation game for quite a long while. I'm not going to say because that might reveal my age, and I like to keep that a little secret. But what I would say is there are some really common themes, and I see that coming through from companies like Lend-Lease, who, interestingly enough, is in a growth stage, which is often more challenging because the need to change can sometimes, you know, be less than you are when your business is under direct pressure. But one of the things that I do find within the organisation is that the role of learning, the business feels that it knows, and it is quite traditional. It's very much that push, as in we push training out to people. As I said, we decide who gets engaged in learning and how they'll actually receive that information. And when I actually came in and spoke to the team here, is they actually said, we need to shift that. We need to kind of leverage the power of what it is people want to learn about. We need to create a clear line of sight between what we do and what the business strategy is. That we need to really challenge and really leverage our professional expertise in terms of the way that learning is delivered. We need to empower our learners to do it themselves. So learner fed to learner led, I think, as Natalie was saying. That's a great phrase. And really importantly, one of the big pieces of work I've done with the team is taking different learners into account. So as Jeevan was talking about the human-centred design, at Lend-Lease we've done a lot of work on trying to create learning personas to really help us understand that one size does not fit all, and how do we make a cost-efficient and effective solution for people to be able to access information. So that brings me to my slide on the how do we make it work. And this is actually the learning operating model that we're looking at in Lend-Lease. And it actually says that it's all connected. That's really the key piece. And that no one piece of learning, be it design, be it delivery, stands alone. Be it the HR function, be it the business strategy, none of that actually stands alone. So what we're talking about here is how do we make sure we've got a global L&D strategy and principles that align with supporting the business. But the way in which, for us, in our various regions, be it in the UK, the US or Asia, the way we get there may be different because our learners are different and our businesses in those regions are actually at different stages. But the objectives and the strategy of areas such as leadership and talent and core capability build would be the same. The way we get there is different. Another piece that we've talked about, which is leveraging the technology, is the solutions team. So solutions is actually how do we understand what it is that the business is trying to solve for, and what are the various ways that we can come up with that learning solution. How much time have we got? How much budget have we got? What type of learners are we talking about? What do we really want those outcomes to be? So how do we deliver that? How do we build a content library that we can continue to reuse rather than having to start from scratch and think that all of our solutions are actually completely different and unique when we know that they're not? The orange box, and I'm interested to see what people think about this, is what we call connect and collaborate. It has two roles for us. One is how do we make sure that we can make a learning environment that is accessible to all people at Lend-Lease, so create that environment rather than deliver the learning. But the second part is how to create an awareness of learning and the importance that learning plays in your organisation, almost like a marketing campaign, not necessarily on your calendar or what are your upcoming programs, but really around how does learning actually connect, what are the different types of tools, etc., that are available to you in the organisation. So it's really around, in the change aspect, really creating that awareness for people. And for Lend-Lease, it's going to be about how do we create different learning communities, bring people together who are interested, and kind of help them understand what it is that that learning is trying to do within the business. So the role is called Connect and Collaborate. It's an interesting one, but yeah, it's kind of a different one. Keen to see what you think. Key is always L&D managers consulting the business, building the business plans. So if we have a look at the next slide, that's actually to me the issues that are really important. So one, we've kind of talked about this, that the nature of work is changing, and we really need to help our leaders at Lend-Lease understand not only just leadership theory, but what do they actually need to do to deliver on our strategy. So the nature of work changes, but how they connect to the strategy changes. And it's more than just generic theory that we need to be teaching them. They can look that up anywhere. We need to kind of create the link, to show that learning has that clear link to growth, innovation, which is one of our key pillars, and motivation and engagement. And the last one is the ability to transform the workplace. For Lend-Lease, we create the workplaces of the future, so our organisation and our function really need to clearly link together. We need to make sure that what people see outside of Lend-Lease and what they see in our websites relates to what it is people actually experience inside the organisation. And I think the next slide actually says that the key to all of that for me is sponsorship. Sponsorship from the senior levels of the organisation. If people just think that learning is just a tool that's there to kind of keep employees happy, get them along to have some nice catering, that won't happen. The other thing for us is it's not about talking about all of these changes, but making sure we deliver and people feel the difference in the way that learning happens. So, and I think I can see in some of the chat that's going on the side, it's our own mindsets in HR and learning. And talking to my own team, they said sometimes we get in our own way of thinking we still have to control learning, whereas in actual fact, it's happening. How do we just help connect people in the organisation and do that better? So that's a key for HR and for learning, because like I said, we're not an island in there. So they're kind of my key points. I suppose if I was to pick up on them, some of the stuff around looking, using your human-centred design, looking at learning personas, considering the push and pull aspects of learning and how you do both, the role of technology, two angles. One, we're always going to need something to record who's learnt what, especially from a compliance angle. The second one, really driving that user experience, and I think that's the real key for leveraging technology and some of the tools that are available. So that's probably it for me, and I'm keen to see what kind of questions you have to ask and what the other presenters have to say. Over to you, Jeevan.
Thanks, Marie. So nice summary of the plans for Lend-Lease. Just sharing a couple of research items from you. Just in terms of some of the investment priorities. This is mostly U.S. Data, but does give an indication of where it's being spent. So a bit's being spent in the highest priority, which is kind of the essential, is the brown, and I think there's a substantial amount being spent in strategy and in performance consulting. So I guess look, all of us talked about this, not necessarily loss of control, but essentially adapting to a world where learners have more control about where and what they learn. And I'm just wondering if the panelists have a view on whether the current L&D structure and setup skill set is actually suitable for this new world, because we still kind of have a lot of learning happening in the classroom, which is the most structured and the most controlled environment, and just outside that is a little bit chaotic, right? So especially if we take the 70-20-10, the 10 is controlled and the 20 and the 70 is chaotic, not under control, and very difficult to implement. So just wondering, Marie and Natalie, if you've got your views about whether the structure and the skill set needs to change to cater for that. Or maybe we start with Natalie first.
Jeevan, forgive me, I missed some of that question. Was it the skill set for learning and development professionals?
Yeah, whether yeah, the structure of L&D and the skill set need to change to adapt to this world of uncontrolled learning or learning that's not controlled.
Yeah. I think the resounding answer is yes. What we need to adapt to, I think, is fluid, and I just think the ability to adapt is probably at the core of everything that we're seeing in business at the moment. So absolutely yes, we are seeing some of that adaptive state going on in the way that we are organised. I mentioned earlier that there is a greater integration between traditional learning and development and traditional HR. We organise ourselves as a talent function, but within talent we have talent consultants and we have talent development. Now, some view talent development as a centre of excellence, that where I go when I need some specialty skill development solution. Other talent consultants see talent development as a partner that they take to work with their business partners to realise genuine business solutions. And I think there's it's often both, and it's often somewhere in between. But I think that ability to inhabit multiple states is incredibly important for our L&D professionals. We need to have a toolkit of transferable skills. That fixed nature of deployment, administration and operations doesn't go away, but it can be centralised, as we have done, in a shared service through a learning management system. We're using a cloud-based learning management system where a lot of those aspects are taken care of, particularly in a world of learner-led, where their interaction with the system captures the analytics required, and also the system is able to feed them the direction or recommendations that they need for their learning. That's all integrated. That then does away with a lot of that lower level thinking and execution that is often sat with learning administrators. So where we have this world of learner-led and we have a quality system to support that, then our learning and development professionals can deploy their efforts in defining and designing more genuine business partnering and considering how they can bring value to that to the business world. And Jeevan, one of the things that you planted the seed in my mind about what are 3 wishes for L&D, and maybe it's timely that I throw these out because I think it goes to the heart of something you mentioned earlier, which is things that work in real life. Our ability to adapt needs to follow real life, and real life in business is defined by how the money is made by the business. And I do notice that L&D professionals fight a brand challenge on that front. I have conversations with business leaders and I hear this feedback. It's a bit too L&D. By that they seem to mean the solution is too theoretical, it's too focused on introspection rather than application, and it's not commercially sharp. So my wishes for the L&D profession is that practitioners and professionals would earn and occupy their seat at the business table. Perhaps that's someone who's run a P&L that might come and run an L&D team. And I wish that commercial acumen was far more part of the L&D professional brand. I wish that L&D functions would adopt more of the agile methods being used in solution development elsewhere in business. Speed to market is critical in all aspects of business, including internal functions. And I wish that speed and responsiveness was much more part of the L&D professional brand. And finally, that L&D professional design was keeping pace with the user-centric design methods to which you've already referred, to ensure that everything we do through curriculum and culture contributes to a relevant experience for every learner. So there you go. You've got more than you bargained for in that question, Jeevan, and my 3 wishes included.
Excellent, and I'll keep it under my Christmas tree, and hopefully it'll come true next year. So, Murray, so just over to you, just in terms of the question about the structure and skills of the team. Does it need to change for this world out of control?
So I've actually, as I said, done learning transformation in 2 or 3 organisations now. One of the pieces that I introduced is I've gone away from design. I believe design can actually be bought from a lot of places. It's more of a commodity, but content curation, so understanding your organisation, its strategy, its learners, what capabilities it needs to build, and being able to curate on that, that's really the key, because you can't outsource that. That actually belongs to your organisation. The other piece I've talked about, and actually very similar to what Natalie's saying on the commercial side, if you're doing consulting, you need to understand the commercials of that business and the commercials of how actually L&D works to enable that business to be successful, to actually draw that down the line. Leveraging the shared service, I still find a lot of L&D folks still like to hold on to the administration and complain about it at the same time. So how do we actually push a lot of our pieces further down to the shared service functions? What I would say, one of the key changes I think in our approach is, and we did just refer to it, we need to be more agile. The days of setting an L&D strategy at the beginning of the year and knowing that that's aligned to where the business is at, I think that's gone. I actually think we need to be checking in far more frequently and aligning far more frequently than we have done in the past. So I think the set and forget days are probably a little bit behind us. And with that agility, actually requires our need to become more efficient, and that's where I think that idea of actually building content libraries that we can quickly grab a hold of to curate information and get out to our learners as they need it is really important. So I actually challenge a lot of my guys and say, think about other industries or other parts of the business, not HR, not L&D, how do they solve similar problems? So I think that's probably, we need to kind of get ideas that are from out of our own profession to move forward. I hope that kind of answers the question there.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's where we'll finish with this panel. So congratulations, Murray and Natalie. Fantastic insights, and I wish we had more time, but we've kind of got this quick date with the 4 panels, so we're going to move on to the next panel. It's my great pleasure to have Peter Hall, and you know that Peter Hall has been associated with LearningCafe and a supporter right from the inception. And we also have Michelle Novis, and I'm kind of hoping that Michelle's mic will work. And also Tom, we welcome Tom Craig, who's actually moved back into Australia from the Middle East after holding a substantial learning portfolio in there. So if you want to say hi, Peter, Michelle, and Tom to the participants, we can also test whether the sound is coming through.
Hey, Jeevan, it's Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeevan. Tom here. Appreciate the introduction.
Can you hear me, Jeevan?
Yes, we can hear you, Michelle. You just need to adjust your volume a little higher for the mic. So if you do that, that'll be fantastic. We can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, so look, this is about this discussion for the next 30-odd minutes is on learning design. And as we discussed in the last panel, learning design is being impacted by the flux, and there are a few themes that I'd like to cover in this panel discussion. But I think more importantly, to get a view from Tom, Michelle, and Peter as to how they are seeing this impact being played out, just not in the design of the learning solutions, but also the skill sets of the team. So let me just, before we start, share a few statistics. So one concept that I do want to bring into play is about lifelong learning. So LearningCafe had a webinar and a strong emphasis that organizations should support lifelong learning. The simple rule being that since companies cannot guarantee long-term employment anymore, they should really help employees develop their employability skills, which means that they are able to move into new jobs as and when they finish with the organization. So 62% of the respondents agreed with that, but I really haven't seen too many organizations helping learners with lifelong learning skills, right? So something that's still kind of outside their radar, and ask the panel about that. But I think the big change that's kind of impacting all of us is that we've, as Murray and Natalie indicated, is that we've kind of moving from designing, planning, and implementing solutions in the mandatory world, so to one that's non-mandatory. Right? So the mandatory world, which includes CPD, compliance, technical training, is a little bit of an easier world because, because I guess people just have to complete mandatory learning. There's no real option, and there are numerous follow-ups if you don't, right? So employees don't really have a choice. The success is very clearly understood. It's course completions and the fact that people have passed, and that's easy to track through an LMS. Funding is easier because, hey, it's compliance, and the organizational reputation or the directors is at risk, or the directors could go to jail. This is a much clearer picture, and that's how this whole online learning started in the 1999s when these platforms came in to enable that compliance learning. So, over the past 15 years, we kind of built this infrastructure for mandatory learning. But mandatory learning still kind of just correlates to the physiological and safety needs of an organization, which is fine. You need that and absolutely essential. But it's not a differentiator for companies, so that they won't be the best company because they've done their compliance training, for example, or done their technical training, right? So I think that's where the volume of learning has increased, is towards learning that's value add. Unfortunately, that's also, you can't make it mandatory. So how do you make it mandatory for people to learn innovation or to be innovative, right? And that's where we kind of, LearningCafe's view is that's where we're kind of feeling this pressure of existing in these two worlds of mandatory learning, working well like a machine, and this non-mandatory learning where we're just scrambling to make sense. So I think the other stat that we got was the question about why learning solutions are perceived to be ineffective, and 41% said that was because we're designing solutions in silos. So there's a lot of chatter in the chat box about using Agile, and Agile could be one solution to this, although not everything everything can be done in an Agile way. There's actually conditions to be met before Agile works best. 24% said poor implementation, improper analysis, and only 15% said ineffective design. So 41% saying designing solutions in silos, i.e. the stakeholders are not involved early enough, or even within L&D, the design team don't involve the development team early on, etc. So something interesting, that did come through. So I think it's time to also treat learners as consumers, which is this whole non-mandatory view of learning. And I want to kind of just stop at that and ask the panel, starting with Peter. Peter, what's your view about whether learning design is adapting well enough to this non-mandatory learning, and how are you finding it at QBE? Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. I think the challenges, and some of the challenges that Marie and Natalie talked about, are exactly my points. I think the issue about becoming or remaining relevant when we don't have a remit that's a police-type remit is really our challenge. And I like to think about it in terms of from a design perspective. I think also I agree partly with something that Marie said around design. I think the days of having people that, in my experience, that can only design, or their forte is design and that's their skill set, I think are over. And I'm now expecting my guys who do design to have a whole lot of other skill sets. Change, comms, obviously stakeholder management, thinking about different solutions, thinking about how we integrate development and learning as part of work rather than being something separate. So I like to summarize it in terms of, I was thinking, how can I succinctly say what I think? One, I guess, is 3 C's. Given a large amount of design is about content, and given it's not about creating content from scratch, it's more about curation than curate is the second one. And the last one, I think, is about context, because you can't curate content that's widely available, or any content, without taking into account the context, the organisation, where it's up to, its maturity, some of the things that Natalie talked around learning culture, how receptive is an organisation, how used is an organisation to do this. And I'll give you a quick example. We decided, as part of our core management skills development to create a completely digital solution. And what we've found is we piloted it with a small group in our North American business. And what we found is all the things that we know just come to play. So, for example, if people are in a face-to-face workshop, they can hide away, they can be passive, they can just be a passenger. You can't do that if it's a digital solution. And when you're able to track, like we were, what people actually complete. So we did a very small pilot. Only 4 people out of the 14 people that were enrolled in that pilot actually completed anything. So our challenge from a design perspective is not just an agile approach or some approach like that, which is more about the how we do it, but it's also about keeping the content relevant, thinking more about learner motivation than I think we've done in the past, because people can't hide. So what are the additional skills that we need to give people? So that's my sense of where we're up to. I think we need to adapt, and we need to be stronger and be able to have stronger capability around curation. We talk about it, we kind of do it, but we need to be able to really make it a core skill of L&D people. Thanks, Jeevan.
Thanks, Peter. I think we'll try Michelle. Michelle, if you want to just give your comments on this, that'll be fantastic.
That's great. So can you hear me? Is my mic
Yes.
turned up? Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
I'm on the phone app, so it's an interesting experience. So if I can just go back to your slides on compliance and mandatory learning, because I actually think I disagree with you in saying that we sort of moved away. I have to say, here at Westpac we have 2 portfolio teams set up to support what you'd call mandatory, but we call it sort of ethics, there's compliance and conduct learning, and then we have another portfolio that we've recently set up because we know it needs some attention, which is around professional standards and CPD. And the reason that we're giving it this amount of focus is because we don't want to just be a tick box compliance model, and we absolutely realise that we have to move towards, the behaviour, cultural innovation pieces that you've got up here, and we're bringing that in to the way in which we're doing our mandatory training. So absolutely, we're doing a lot of clean-up. There's a lot of duplication, and there's a lot of stuff now in the new world where perhaps we've just taken things for granted that we've needed, and when you actually question it, you don't particularly need to do it in that way. But I guess more to the point, you can do it in a much better way where you pull the learning together and you build it in something that is relevant and that connects with the audience, that is perhaps scenario-based or whatever, but that is a much more engaging way of rolling out mandatory learning. So we're trying to bring that ethos in to the business, and that's why we've got a focus in those 2 portfolios to do that. So I'd just be interested in other people's views on that. And we certainly decrease the amount of mandatory learning we have to do, and we certainly move to personalised, to what the previous speakers have talked about, absolutely personalisation and getting learning bites for what you need when you need it. But yeah, so that would just be my first point. And your other question, Jeevan, was, just remind me.
Oh no, that's fine, Michelle. We'll come back to the other question later. So I'll actually move over to Tom. So Tom, I know that you've kind of come back to Australia and kind of have exposure to running a learning function in Qatar for the airline there. So just wondering, would be interesting to hear your view on this in terms of the mandatory learning versus value-added learning, I guess. And how do you see, is there a difference in different parts of the world?
Yeah, thanks, Jeevan. I think in the context of learning design, the landscape is shifting a bit, but there's also some things that are staying pretty constant. The things that are, or the influences that are changing, I feel, are around the sort of content explosion that's happening out there. So whereas, open source free content used to be pretty low quality and you could kind of take it or leave it. I think the quality is improving, the accessibility is improving, and that makes more options available to people in the business or individuals that need to learn something. So the role of L&D teams in supporting that need to really think about efficiency and speed and being able to do things, respond to that need really quickly in whatever way is most suitable for meeting that need in any way that's going to deliver what the business needs. I think the other changing influence is around the demand on learning teams. Just like any business unit is under pressure to deliver, everything is measured, there's pressure on productivity. I think that flows on to learning teams, and consequently if we can't find a way to meet that requirement quickly, be it a compulsory or a mandatory training requirement or more of a behavioural development requirement, then that's going to make life pretty tricky. The things that stay the same though, I think, or are pretty consistent, are the principles of how people learn, and again, whether that's a compliance learning requirement or something more aspirational. The principles of Bloom's taxonomy, I think, remain. I've got a Montessori school over the road, and I went for a walk yesterday, and there's a sign with a quote up that says, "The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled." And I've heard that before, and I think it's a wonderful quote. And I don't think we as learning professionals should lose sight of the fact that a well-designed learning experience will make a massive difference, and we've still got a big role to play. And probably the last point I'd put on that, or something that I think is pretty consistent, maybe building on the previous note, is that the learning experience, it's all about making as good or a fantastic a learning experience as possible. So now there are more tools, there's more delivery channels, there's more modes of delivery, but at the end of the day, it's about providing the experience that meets that requirement. And again, whether that's a compliance requirement or something more aspirational, I think that the principles are the same.
Thanks, Tom. So I think we just move on to a couple of other themes that we need to discuss in terms of impact on learning design. I think the first was content curation. So we had a pretty active discussion on content curation. And LearningCafe for the first time ran a public workshop. Last week we had 16 people from about 7-8 organizations. So there's interest, and obviously we're kind of looking at the next version to improve it dramatically, because we kind of found that that workshop needed to be broken into two parts, because content curation has a lot of tech skills involved. Plus plus the basics of content curation, the theory itself, and the tech skills were a bit of a steep climb for a lot of the work participants. So I think we'll have to separate that out. But just a quick one around that content curation was the fact that it's probably going to be a little bit more complex to implement, because there's a lot to content curation than we think that we are. But the one that I want to get the panel to discuss is the impact of agile design, right? So agile or concepts like Scrum, methods like Scrum to the design of learning solutions. And I'm just wondering whether you've, number one, felt the need to use agile, and if you have, what's your experience been? And we'll probably start with Peter.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. I think agile is one of those things that, as everyone realises, gets bandied about, and there's a difference of opinion or different understandings about what it means. I guess I'm not so much committed to saying this is the methodology we use, rather what is the work that we need to do, and testing whether a traditional, as your slide here says, traditional learning design approaches are really valid when a large amount of what we do is not about creating content from scratch, as either curating content or, as Marie said before, buying content. To me, how we do it is less critical than what we do, and the context and the alignment with the business need, I think, is the critical piece, and also the culture piece, because I think we can build the best solution, but if the culture runs against it, then there's little value in doing it, and I think we have a responsibility. And as I said in the chat box before, I think part of the problem is us. if we're going to evolve and transform as a function and as a profession, then we need to really think about what do we want to do and what should we be doing, and do we have a place for people that still want to do things like we did 20 years ago. I'm not sure we have some of those people, but in a lot of learning teams, in my experience, when I've picked them up from other people, we do have people that are wedded to the past and how we did things in the past. And I think that's part of our challenge, will be to say, okay, are we part of the problem? Are our colleagues in HR part of the problem as well, before we even tackle the business? Because if we're not aligned, then there's no sense in doing that. So a little bit of a rambling answer, but essentially I'm not particularly fussed about whether we use Agile or not. I think it's more critical about what we deliver and the way in which we engage the business and building that and using more SMEs in terms of delivery and design and things like that than it is about sticking to a particular process. We can spend a lot of time talking about that. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Michelle, over to you. Your voice is a little bit faint, so maybe you could speak a little bit louder. That'll be fantastic.
Okay.
Even shout.
I saw the comments. That's right. We have been playing a bit in this space. So we have done some form of Agile with some of our learning design projects, and we're becoming a little bit more, I'd say, professional to the way it should be run in the recent weeks. So I've just personally come out of a 4 one-week sprints, and it's continuing to move on. But it's, I think I'm really quite impressed with the methodology, and I think you can mix up some traditional methodology within the Agile project management space, in the sense of differentiating, some of the things that we used to do perhaps in a linear way, we're actually doing it simultaneously. So it's quite an interesting process. So it's extremely good, I find, for sort of collaboration and obviously transparency and being able to test your ideas and get a review by many actually quickly, and actually sign off a lot quicker, because there's so many dependencies in what you're needing to do before you go on to the next sprint. But of course, what comes with it is quite a sort of a strange feeling of being a little bit out of control, because you really, somebody actually equated it to feeling like we were in Alice in Wonderland, but that you've actually got to trust your team, and that it's sort of going to come together at stand-ups each day, but in essence, you don't necessarily see the final picture, and you don't necessarily work on the same piece of work all the way through. So that is a whole new mindset, but what it has allowed us to do is, I think, get real robust thought and diversity of opinion, and allowed us to move quicker. So we are playing with the methodology, and we're hoping to sort of take it to the next couple of big projects that are in our capability plans next year. So I'm quite an advocate for it.
Thanks, Michelle. And that certainly, sounds like you've progressed quite a bit along the way. Tom, what are your thoughts? I don't know if you've, in your last job or this current job, you're contemplating using Agile for design.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And I noticed in the comments someone made reference to the word nimble. And Peter before was talking about some of the language we use and not getting too caught up in that, but perhaps thinking more broadly about what we're trying to achieve. And I had an experience last year, which I'll quickly share. I was lucky enough to go from the Middle East to the US to visit the GE Leadership Academy, Crotonville, and wonderful experience and an incredible facility if you ever get the chance. What I was introduced to there was their concept called FastWorks, and essentially they will get a product or a thing to about 60 to 80%. They will then launch that to the customer, usually with a couple of their people observing it.
Yes, I'm just coming back because I think we've lost, we might have lost Tom. Can you just raise your hand if you can hear my voice?
and over
Okay,
a very
cool. All right. So I
compacted
think we
sort of
just lost
period,
Tom for
seeing
the
it in
time being, and
action,
I'm sure he'll
improved the last sort of
join us
20-odd
back.
percent.
But while Tom's
And
doing that, if
that
you just
works
look
really
at
well
the
for them, not
we
just
got-
in the development of products, but also in process improvement and indeed
Sorry, Tom,
in
we'd lost you for a
learning
minute.
design. So I was inspired by that kind of visit and got back to Qatar. And at the time we were writing our standards around learning design and delivery. We had started with a basic sort of ADDIE approach. And I guess what this encouraged me to do, the visit, was to sort of go back to the drawing. Okay. Yeah. So we were defining, the way we wanted to do that, and that perhaps there's a better way than ADDIE to achieve that nimbleness. We did a lot of work. We looked at a lot of models. We looked at Agile. We looked at SAM. We looked at other sort of rapid approaches that were more homegrown. And in the end, we actually got a bit confused, and we ended up going back to the ADDIE model, but with a rapid version of being able to apply that and some tools to be able to apply that. And I guess that would be the one sort of point I'd make here. There is no question that a rapid or an agile or a technique to deliver something more quickly and more to a high quality to the business is a good thing. I'd absolutely support that. But I think sometimes we can get little bit too clever and make our world a bit more complex than it needs to be. Whereas some of the principles of learning design that we talked about before and the ADDIE concept are still very relevant in today's day and age. I'd just throw in there, in the auto and general environment, I think there's a lot of talk about Agile.
Thanks, Tom. So I've got
some
some three great views from
the principles of Agile are applied
the
in
panel
learning design, and it
on the
starts
use of
with
Agile. So
getting the right people
definitely,
in the room around
I guess,
a whiteboard
looking
and trying to accelerate
at
that analysis
Agile as a
stage,
method,
and then starting to turn that into
maybe in
something.
its pure
whilst we're
form
not
or a
formally
hybrid
using
form with
the
ADDIE,
tools,
but certainly, as
we're
Tom
at the
indicated,
time
there's
of applying
potential to
them
kind of
directly.
use the Agile principles, especially in the analysis and the design phase, and in the development phase, the waterfall approach might be a little bit more effective. So just a combination, might work. So I think the last question I guess I have for the panel is, maybe starting with Peter, is Peter, maybe a couple of things you kind of wish for L&D in the new year.
Thanks, Stephen. I think some of the things that Natalie talked about, I think I would like us as a profession to really explore and understand and analyse where we are, and that all the people in our teams are in a similar place. Because if we don't believe in what we're doing, and we don't believe in some of those things about learner-led, rather than us leading things, us controlling things. Natalie's point about administration, I complain about it, but I still want to do it because I don't trust somebody else in a shared service function to do it. I think a mindset around that, and also building our professionalism, so that we do understand things like Agile and Scrum. We can make a decision, we can make a call about whether this is for us. And I don't mean just accepting the whole thing and taking it on board. I think just what works for us and what space. I think the other piece we need to do, a big piece of capability build, is around digital. And I don't just mean online learning, I mean virtual classroom, which I see as a huge gap in a lot of our capability bags. All those things together, and also starting to think about design thinking. So we talk a lot about, when we're doing online particularly, we talk about UAT, and our version of UAT simply means we test that the content works on a particular browser in a particular environment in a particular country. And that's not design thinking or user design, that's just technically checking it's right. So I think we have a challenge too to do more and more of that. Involve learners as we build rather than at the end of it. Often we take our guidance from senior leaders or business managers or something without actually thinking about the learner and the motivation of the learner. So I come back to that point as well. So there's a few things, Jeevan.
Thank you. And Michelle, over to you, just in terms of maybe one or two things that you want to change for in L&D next year, or wish for.
Okay, to follow on from Peter, I think design thinking methodology is key, to put the user at the center, and the personalization pieces that Marie and Natalie were talking about up front. I think they mean a wish would be our IT infrastructure to support some of the things we'd really love to do around transferable skills assessment and then being able to link out to curated content or playlists. And I think that if we can continue the journey with customer-centered design and get the skill set up to produce personalized customer journeys for people, not just curate, but pull that together in a very useful format for people to make it easily accessible and relevant, they would be my wish list for next year.
Thank you. Over to you, Tom, for your wish list for Christmas for L&D. Yeah.
So waving my magic wand, I think it would be fantastic if we could reconsider what control of learning looks like for L&D professionals. I think we've got to hand over control in a lot of things, and that will come with a mindset shift, with a different sort of skill set. And I think we're partnering with other stakeholders, both within and outside of the business, such as our digital teams, our marketing teams, our sales people, etc., because until we do that, I think we'll remain, or we have a risk, I should say.
Thank you very much. So thanks to, again, to the second panel,
but if we
Peter
can relinquish that control
and Michelle
and
and Tom, thank you very much for insights.
And
we kind of now move to the third panel, which is myself, but I'll do less talking. But Rob Wilkins, again, if you've been following Learning Cafe, Rob's been there right from the start, along with Peter. But I have, also Rob's, I really admire him because he's kind of charted his own skill and career path, from pure learning to a role which encompasses learning, knowledge management a lot more. So that's kind of a great transition. But from the US, we've also got Mike, and Mike got tremendous experience in, and one of the leading voices of the use of technology in learning. So I'm really excited about having a discussion with these two gentlemen. So Rob and Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Jeevan. It's good to be here, mate.
Same here. It's nice to meet you all, and it's great to be on the stage with, or virtual stage with you, Rob, and you, Jeevan.
Thank you very much. Rob, you might need to increase your volume a little bit, or just speak a little bit louder. But let's just, share a couple of things that we, from the Learning Cafe webinars over the years. The first thing is Learning Portal. So we discussed Learning Portals. We, in fact, had maybe two webinars on Learning Portal. One was the kind of the design, and the implementation was the second one. The one things that we asked the participants in our survey was what should be a KPI, right? In terms of how many times should learners visit the Learning Portal, right? Now, 24% said more than 20 times a month. So it's about once a day, working day, and 30% said 2 to 5 times, and 30% said 0 to 1 times a month, right? I think that's quite an interesting stats in terms of just the expectations from things like Learning Portal and the user consumption, where only 24% said that they should visit the portal at least once a day, right? So maybe that's kind of a good place to start in terms of learning technology and the low uptake of learning technology, except of course for completing mandatory courses, which everyone has to. So starting with Rob. Rob, are you kind of disappointed with, I'm kind of, positioning you that way, but I've been disappointed with learning technology, so I'll put it out there, especially the ways that LMS and LMS vendors have progressed and brought out features, etc. They've been slow, they've been reactive, they haven't taken the risks and not led. So just wondering, where do you stand, Rob, in terms of the your sanguineness of learning technologies?
Thanks, Jeevan. Oh, look, I think it's been for me, it's been an incredible journey just to watch how this unfolded. And I think LMSs, for all intents and purposes, came out with very, very true, fundamental, strategic objectives in terms of the way that it would enable learning within organisations. I'm going to suggest that the reason why I'm disappointed nowadays is that organisations, and particularly CEOs and other leadership areas, have hooked into the learning management system as part of the risk management infrastructure. And the reality is nowadays, why do we see a prevalence of mandatory online education? It's because everybody knows that they've got a record-keeping structure where they can actually look at the diffusement of responsibility and start to actually really look at, what's being done, when is it being done, is everybody covered, and have we actually got our butts covered in terms of the relative legislation that needs to go out there. So I think LMS has got hijacked around about 3.5, 4 years ago in a very, very big way as part of the risk management framework of the organisation. And once that gets taken over and taken away from you, the ability to be able to look at the disposition of your learners within the organisation and really cater for where you want to take them and what you'd love to deliver to them becomes incredibly and increasingly more difficult, because the organisation has seen the value in terms of the data, the analytics, and the way that they can actually use that. So, for me, learning management systems right now are a reasonably important part of the infrastructure, but at the same time, they don't live up to their reputation or their potential, and that's because the organisation loses a lot of interest in trying to actually promote that or work with that or do anything with it.
Thanks, Rob. Mike, over to you for your views on this.
So I wouldn't say I'm contrary to what Rob's saying. I agree in principle. I think part of the challenge is a lot larger. It really is a rock and a hard place. When you think about the business of learning management systems, there's not been one in the last 5 years that's actually been able to be public for longer than 3 years before having to actually get bought out and being taken off in order to be able to innovate. Generally speaking, profits are razor thin, so that also actually reduces the ability for a lot of innovation from happening from the technology space. But I also want to lay a little bit of the blame, as Rob puts it, on some of the ways that the culture of the organization has taken a hold of learning itself and looked at technology as a way of enforcing an older concept or an older mode. And what I mean by that is, I think in many ways, what we're in the midst of a larger sea change and moving from an industrial age to what might be called a knowledge age. And in the industrial age, you have to organize hierarchically because access to information is limited, and the dissemination and distribution and the creation of knowledge to be able to take advantage of that information is why you have such hierarchical structures. Once you have power actually tied into that kind of hierarchical model, it really becomes problematic when you move to a knowledge age where access to information, because you have such things like Wikipedia and you have ubiquitous access and more content available than one can actually do in one's lifetime, you have a different kind of problem, and that is actually knowing what to do with knowledge and then the wisdom and what to do from that. And I think that the knowledge age is really about, automation is taking away a lot of the kinds of routine and rote activities, but at the same time that was happening, ironically, there was a clampdown for this sort of risk management approach. So really kind of to put an underline on it, I think that Rob has a very good point about it being part of this 3, 4, 5 years back. A lot of systems really just get hijacked inside of organizations. And then simultaneously to that, a lot of the kinds of things that really learning professionals could have done, we weren't really doing 4 or 5 years back. And we're playing a bit of catch up at this point. part of the challenge that we all have to face is how to actually leverage, and we had a really interesting kind of webinar chat a little bit earlier about culture and the role of L&D in culture. And I think that this is part of the challenge with technology isn't necessarily the technology, but the culture in which it's being implemented, or the context in which it's being applied. So I'll pass the microphone back to you, Jivan.
And look, I think between the three of us, we could dwell a couple of hours over a glass of wine about the economics of LMS. I'm constantly amazed by the number of vendors in this space, and you're right, profitability is low, and all those kind of industry dynamics. Those are great insights, and kind of maybe that lack of profitability hasn't encouraged companies to take risks with technology. The other thing I want to talk about is personalization. So there has been a lot of talk about personalization and the need for a learning management system of one, as in each person has their unique profile, which is a combination of learning requirements from their role, their job, the business priorities, or plus also their personal interests. But I think one of the things that Rob mentioned, and I think Mike, you too in the chat, is the lack of data, right? So if you look at HRMS and the data in the learning management systems, it's mostly around role and it's mostly around job, and that too is not very granular. So we kind of stuck with this in a situation where we would like to get personalized learning, right? But we don't have the data to personalize. And which could be quite simple to get by simply asking people to fill in a survey every year, and then it gets personalized. So just having your view about personalization and personalization of learning, how far do you think is it away in an effective manner, or is it mostly hype, which will take a little more time to happen simply because the data traditionally in the L&D and HR is pretty poor? So starting probably with Mike, you first. So
I actually had the ability to do some really innovative stuff when I was at GE before I left to join Cognizant. One of the things that we actually did was build out some personalization. We built out some artificial intelligence that did natural language processing, did some matching on what people were giving feedback to each other, and tried to match it to a high likelihood of a learning experience that would be appropriate to the person on the other side. The real challenge that we actually discovered wasn't that we couldn't do the matching or we couldn't write any of the artificial intelligence, but that the access to about 5 different kinds of people data was found in about 36 to 60 different data sources. And so just to actually create the place where that would happen was painful from a developer standpoint. So it's not that personalization is impossible, it's that the organization has taken too long siloing data away from each other. And I think that the really interesting opportunity that exists, the next frontier in learning technology, is how quickly organizations move down the path to link people data, because at the end of the day, people data and performance are really going to be where the next competitive edge is going to be found. So that challenge of actually finding a way to link this data in order then to create personalization or test approaches toward personalization, is definitely a limitation in the space. But I don't think that personalization is an impossibility. It's more a matter of really understanding what are you trying to accomplish, what do people need to be able to do, what are the outcomes that you really want to achieve, both from an individual, what does that individual need to be able to do? What does the organization need that individual to do? And how does that individual perform that task or activity in a collective kind of sense? So how is that actually done in a team or whatever? And I think that, breaking it down to that level of kind of just being very focused, if you start small and then accelerate, you can do an awful lot. And this is where I think that the switch to nimble is a nice turn a phrase that Tom had actually made before. Rather than saying agile and getting caught up in a lot of different flavors of agile and all of the different approaches and needs, and as someone who's practiced agile for some time, I completely understand the discipline behind it, but the concepts are really what we're talking about are nimble, and I think that these are three elements that really do need to be addressed: the data sources, thinking through the problem and from a design perspective, and then having outcomes at the end tie back to these approaches. So I'll stop there. And as you're right, Jivan, I think that you and I probably with a bottle of wine probably could accomplish an awful lot.
Thanks. Actually, I'll move on to the next theme I want to talk about because we've got little time left. Let's talk about AR and VR next. And obviously, VR is kind of back in the news a lot more because of the kit released by Apple, and there certainly seems to be some technological and computational advances, computational versus cost advances made that seems to be that the time is coming, right? But we've heard that before, and especially in learning and development, there were a couple of chat messages talking about some exciting applications to, I think it was safety training, etc. So Rob, over to you. Just your views on, having said that, I mean, we still, the VR headsets are, for example, not that cheap. They're still wired. More than 5 minutes, with movement, you get nausea. There's safety concerns, lots of other things which mean that they aren't exactly mainstream. They're not being adopted mainstream. Looks like AR has more promise, but again, it does require similar things like personalization, a lot more data, and a lot more integration. So, Rob, over to you. Over your thoughts about AR and VR for learning. Where are we?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think we're at the point where we've actually got to take a very, very long, hard look at this. I'm only doing it from the capacity of working for the Department of Education and actually seeing what's happening in some of our schools. A lot of people might not know, but Gymea Bay Public School is a beta tester for all things Apple and a worldwide tester, and they come here quite often to actually get the kids and the people in the robotics labs and the computing area to test things. And I've seen some incredible things. We've got a virtual tour with augmented reality from Mungo National Park, and it's incredible stuff, the stuff that they're actually doing. So the take I have on this is to be exposed to what's actually happening at the fundamentals of the education levels, and where we're heading with education means that the generations that are coming through are going to be far more conversant with the technologies and far more conversant with what's available to that. So where is it heading? I think organisations have got a massive opportunity to start to really look at the aspects of this and start to actually understand. I think AR is where the greatest opportunity lies at this point in time. Costs are incredibly vital, as we know. That's going to come down to the relationship you have with your vendor at times, I think, because your vendors will, look at it in terms of the amount of work that's got to go into it for what return you're going to get. And we all know scale gives you a hell of a lot of discount value. So, but the augmented reality that you've got available to you nowadays, and the way that you can actually embed that, particularly within the work that you do, is a wonderful thing. The best one that I saw was for a big government organisation down in Melbourne. Melbourne seems to be doing some really, really good stuff in this space. And before they moved into an agile working environment, they had an augmented reality app of 4 or 5 floors ready to go, so people could actually come in and have a look at the augmented reality app and do the tour online. Then they had a VR one where you could actually go to a little pod, put the glasses on, and you could actually walk yourself through the place without even actually visiting the building. And they said the accuracy when they moved in on day one was uncanny. They likened it to about 90% accurate in terms of what they did. So there's plenty of application, there's plenty of opportunity. I think it's all going to come down to being able to actually identify the best learning opportunities and the biggest bang for buck in terms of see that from a design perspective. Thank you, Rob. Mike, over to you on your views.
Yeah, I actually agree 100% with Rob on this one. There's a cost versus impact kind of equation that you sort of have to measure here. we've applied VR. I've worked on a few different projects where we've applied VR successfully, but it was a high risk environment where failure meant people dying. And so running people through these kinds of, when there's a high risk environment where safety is a critical kind of consideration, when downtime to the machines or the applications or the industrial processes are things that have significant cost associated with them, running people through this in the VR kind of space and having them trained for an event so that you reduce the downtime and you're able to flip the equation has huge business impact, and the businesses are willing to pay for that. And in fact, actually, they don't need to see too much more than a couple of proofs of concepts before they actually take out the checkbook and write the check. What I've found with AR is that there's a lot of possibility here, but I'm not really sure that anyone's done an overwhelming amount of great work, and I think that some of the things that I've been seeing in prototype that are about to come out in Las Vegas in about a month and a half are really going to be in this space on AR, and I think that AR we may not call it. There's sort of a kind of a merging of two concepts that are happening. One is augmented reality, and the other is augmented intelligence, and I think that the fact is that Amazon hired, quote unquote, 55,000 robots last month. And augmented intelligence and being able to interact with robots and having robots as part of your team is actually becoming more and more of a reality in certain types of contexts. And I think that augmented reality and augmented intelligence as a concept we're probably going to see some of those concepts merge together. We'll probably have a few different flavors of this when we move to the end of 2018.
Thanks, Mike. So obviously somewhere to go, but I guess just the other question is that AR and VR have startup costs that are kind of higher than other technologies. So somebody quoted me a figure of, I think it was $40,000 for something in VR at least. So that's like a starting for VR, the basic stuff. I'm just wondering whether the L&D folks really need to be careful in terms of choosing the use case for AR and VR, including that if it can be done through something else which is cheaper, don't do it because that solution is not sustainable. It's just a project, and it's just a plaything. So obviously, kind of safety and healthcare come out to be the best in terms of use cases. But any tips, Rob, in terms of when L&D people are exploring and get all excited about AR and VR? A couple of tips for them to follow.
Yeah, I think that there's three things that I would always encourage. The first one is, we were just discussing this online a little bit, but use the business analytics you've got available to you. Your business is measured, be it a government department, be it a not-for-profit, be it a school, be it a corporate business. It's measured based on a whole set of statistics and data, and if you use that data, you can strengthen your business case immeasurably. The second thing is to actually say to yourself, have you done something like that before, and can you actually compare like for like, or can actually compare old paradigms to new paradigms and run it in a very, very small pilot? That gives you a real opportunity to be able to actually show the old versus the new, the benefits versus some of the risk factors. And the third thing I think that is really, really important is just find a relationship and a sponsor within the business that looks at innovation as being tantamount to something that the business wants to engage in, and be part of that innovation community and try and get in there and find ways of being able to actually partner with them, work with them, do whatever you need to do, because you can always find financial services is a great one. A lot of the augmented reality apps that actually work with core logic data around housing and buying houses is a classic example where I think L&D could have made a massive benefit within there but missed the boat. So they're the three things I'd look for.
Mike, over to you for a couple of tips. Mike, you there? I think we might have lost Mike. by the time Mike comes back, he might be back. I guess as Mike will come back online. If you see on your screen, the one thing I do want to discuss is these capability jumps required by technology within L&D. So L&D moved from face-to-face to online learning. So this was the LMSs and the online courses, and I think we've kind of just completed the jump. In my opinion, took longer than I would expected, but we've kind of made that jump, right? So we know LMSs and we know online courses. There's lots of skilled people now in online building tools like Lectora. So yeah, it's kind of become a commodity. The next one is kind of the next gen, which is AR, VR, social, kind of is more complicated. And sophisticated, so that's the next jump. And finally, self-organizing learning. This is where everything happens around the learner by using data that's available to basically generate the content that they require at that time in the place that they want, right? So the question for you, Rob, and Mike, if he's back, is while we made the jump from face-to-face to online learning, which is the compliance learning. How difficult do you think it's going to be for L&D to make the next jump to technologies which are more complex and more sophisticated to use? Rob, over to you.
No worries whatsoever. Look, Jim, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. For one reason and one reason. If you set aside the LMS, just about every other technology that we use from a learning and development framework perspective now, I think is commensurate with other areas. In other words, the business so take VR and AR for instance, it's being used by a number of different areas, be it marketing, be it somebody who's actually looking to use it for product placement. There's a whole range of reasons why.
Can I just check with everyone? Sorry, Rob, to disturb you. Just wondering if, Rob, it's a little bit hard to hear. So if you just want to, yeah, that's better. Thanks. Over to you.
Sorry. Yep. So I was just going to say, I think the biggest jump for us to do is to actually understand that a lot of the technologies that we will be using are already being used by the businesses in different ways, shapes, or form. A really good example at the moment, I was just talking about this before, is that some of the new startups in Australia and one in America in particular took a look at their organisation, took a look at the people that were working with the organisation. When they asked them what their preferences were, they said they preferred to learn by video. And most of them had said that they'd learned a lot of skill using YouTube. They developed a YouTube channel as their learning management system, and that's how they deploy all their learning on their YouTube channel. It's got to be one of the most cost-effective, easiest ways of being able to actually get their training out there, and they've got records of who logs in when and does whatever it needs to do through the YouTube Academy. They've taught themselves how to actually do that. So the technologies that are being used today are being used quite wide-scale and widespread, other than learning management systems. And I think for us it's a matter of facing the fact that the rest of the business uses this. How can we latch into the technology innovations that they're doing and see how we can augment that by including learning as part of the workflow, if you like. There's plenty of ways of being able to do that. The only hindrance to that is going to be if people can't recognise the fact that they're learning as part of working, and that's an education unto itself.
Thank you very much, Rob. So kind of looking forward to this jump. The last question I want to ask, and I think Mike is having issues with the mic. So if Mike will use the chat box to answer the questions. But the last question is around the phasing out of Flash, which is happening for a long time, but at the same time that the content development tools haven't really become sophisticated enough to kind of build the same interactivity that was there before. So responsive learning is, by its very nature and the technology behind it, makes it difficult to kind of have the interactivity that you had in Flash. So a quick view from you, Rob, and also from Mike in the chat box is, do you think that that's going to be a big disadvantage for L&D, the fact that we can't build that interactivity in HTML? Or difficult and costly to build?
Yeah, look, I'll just go very quickly. I don't think so, Jeevan, and I think that's just a matter of being wise about your design and really looking at the way that you want to pull things together. You know, and when I look at the ability to be able to pull in video, to be able to pull in, you know, different examples of what's happening and just use the technologies that are available, I think it's not going to take away from the online learning experience whatsoever. I don't think it'll take away from e-learning. In fact, you know, if we're starting to incorporate VR and AR, I think the possibilities are endless. So I see that whole flash thing as a bit of a, you know what, let's just adapt and move forward with the times and not really worry about it.
Thank you, and Mike's typing his answer in the chat box. But I think this is where we'll finish the tech panel. So it's been a lot of fun, Rob and Mike especially from the US. So thank you very much for participating in this webinar at a time which is not exactly convenient. So thanks for that. Great insights from both of you, and you know, hopefully we can get together for a glass of wine. But we'll move on to the next panel. Very excited about the next panel because I think this is probably where I'll probably need to do the least talking, because we've got Aaron McEwen, who's also been associated with LearningCafe for a long time, and you know, obviously with CEB now Gartner, has a huge amount of experience and insights into what's happening into the profession of HR and L&D, but also Nicole Thompson. Nicole's Chief People Officer at Hudson, and I've had the fortune of working with Nicole, and I can also you know, see Pablo in the audience somewhere, also worked with Nicole, so fantastic leader, but also has a definite view on where learning profession and L&D professional should be headed. And I'd also like to welcome Fiona Jury. Fiona Jury is from Chapman CG, and Fiona will be talking to us about the state of L&D careers and job that she's come across. But I'll start you know, by saying hello, by asking the panelists to say hello to the participants, also to make sure that the mic is working.
Hello everyone, it's Aaron McEwen here. Very happy to be here.
Thanks, Aaron. And I think, was it Fiona?
Hello, hi everyone, it's Nicole. Yes, hi Jeevan, thanks for that introduction.
Great. So we got Fiona, we also got Nicole, so third person there was Nicole. So everything's working fine. So let's start with the graph on the screen where we asked a question for this webinar during the registration process was, do you think the skill gap in L&D professionals will increase, decrease, or remain the same in 2018? 56% said increase, 33% said same, and only 11% said decrease. So it looks like that you know, instead of catching up, we're kind of falling behind. So you know, probably you know, want to start with Aaron first. What's happening here?
I think what we're seeing here is actually reflective of almost all industries and all job segments. And I'd say that largely it's driven by increased digitalization. So what we've found in our research is that the need for increased technology comfort and digital capability is impacting all roles, not just tech roles. And I don't think L&D is immune to that. So I think there's a big segment of this which is linked to the previous conversation that is about becoming more digitally savvy and being able to work with emerging technologies and their application to learning. But I also think you know, Jeevan, you and I have spoken long and hard about this over the years, but the idea of content curation becoming more important, the need to train and facilitate and design learning programs may be becoming less important. And I think the stats that we see here are reflective of those two shifts.
Thank you, Aaron. Nicole, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, did you say that?
Nicole, you there? Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, fantastic.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I think it's a reflection of where the learning profession is at. I think there is an increased awareness and conscious incompetence in terms of the huge skill gap that we have to bridge in reflecting the future of work and the modern learner. So I think, in my mind, the 56 absolutely understand that there's obviously a gap that we need to bridge, but certainly the 33 and the 11, maybe my hypothesis would suggest that it might be reflective of people that are not across yet what that future of work is going to look like and what learning needs to do to add value in terms of more contemporary practices.
Thank you. I'll just move on to the next slide before we're going to move to Fiona. Is one about job opportunities forecast. So it looks like that 48% said the job opportunities at L&D are better than in 2017. 38% said the same, and 16% worse. So definitely there seems to be an uptick in the in the jobs and the general mood about employment in L&D. So it's a good time to actually hand over to Fiona to comment about that, but also kind of talk about the trends in the L&D job market. Fiona, over to you.
Thanks, Jeevan. Really interesting data there. In terms of the, from a high level standpoint, learning and development isn't necessarily a high volume job specialisation, so we're not seeing a real sort of growth in the number of L&D jobs in Australia and indeed probably regionally and globally. And where learning and development sits in the construct of an HR team, can really vary between different organisations. There's still a lot of pure L&D roles, but we're often seeing learning embedded into broader organisational development roles, which require, a real depth of knowledge around not just learning, but also talent management, workforce planning, diversity and change. And touching on, a number of the themes around cost constraint, I think Natalie was mentioning before, but, learning budgets are contracting. 49% of people think L&D spending will remain the same in 2018. We're probably seeing that flow through to, not necessarily any new headcount creation in the learning space, but more a reconstruction or perhaps a reconstitution of some of the roles and how they're delivered. I think organisations are cost conscious, so they're always wanting to see the return on investment in any headcount, and organisations and leaders are wanting L&D to be a real lever to drive change and drive business results. So these learning roles, as you guys have stated already, they're becoming more complex. In a lot of ways, organisations are looking to these roles as a way of achieving competitive advantage. So I've put a quote in here below by a friend of mine, Simon Terry. He's a management consultant around innovation, the future of work, leadership and learning. And he wrote a great blog about this concept that he mentioned, big learning. So we've got big data. But what about big learning as the next big thing that is going to give organisations competitive advantage in this volatile and uncertain future? So the links there will take you through to his blog, and you might find that to be of interest. So there's some of the overall broad trends that we're seeing. And in terms of some of the skills and competencies that are in demand when we take briefs for senior L&D roles. We've touched on today, a number of you have touched on, digital savvy, and organisations are really wanting someone to come in and to really give them the solution that they perceive to be, give them a digital solution that they perceive to be perhaps more cost effective and scalable and nimble, and able to be changed and tweaked as their market changes and the customer and their employee group changes. So being across all of these different digital technologies and being able to choose the right ones is a really, it's a challenging filtering exercise because Jeevan said before, there's so many technologies out there, there's a lot of noise, and being able to focus on the right ones is an important skill set now. I think Natalie mentioned earlier around commercial acumen. This is a really important one. It's the learning professionals that see themselves as a business person first, who happens to wear an L&D hat to provide business solutions, are the ones that are differentiated in the market. So that is the people who can identify unforeseen problems for their business leaders and propose perhaps previously unthought of solutions, and able to build proposals and business cases that are compelling and outcome rich. So it's those influencing and selling skills.
Fiona, can I actually interrupt at this point because and also get views from the other panelists, because this commercial or business acumen, this has been a gap for probably ever since the profession of HR and L&D have existed, right? And consistently kind of comes out of the biggest gaps in our profession in different surveys. I'm just wondering, do you know why? Starting with yourself, Fiona, but then also Aaron and Nicole, as to why is this still a big gap, and why is it so difficult to plug it?
I think it's simply a legacy of the way organisations were siloed in days gone by, and I think that when we interview senior HR leaders now, most of them will say, look, I'm a business person, I just happen to do HR interventions to make the business better. So I think it's perhaps it's a cultural thing across perhaps across the profession, to have that little adjustment around mindset, and also for individuals to have the confidence to, if you're starting in a new job or you're currently in a job, to really get out there and be confident to spend time with and in the business to gain that deeper learning of the employee base and, the market outside and the customers.
Thank you. Aaron, what are your views on this commercial acumen gap?
I think to the previous comment, it's just not the typical pathway that L&D professionals go through. So if we break down what is commercial acumen, it's usually a combination of sales experience, maybe P&L responsibility, and operational leadership in some way. So I think we have to look at the traditional pathway of L&D professionals as not necessarily giving them an opportunity to have any of those three key experiences. So I suspect that what that will mean moving forward, and other speakers have alluded to this, is that we may start to look at learning professionals that come out of the business itself and can then apply learning capability to driving outcomes in the business. Or we may see people coming out of sales environments. And I do think there's a kind of growing area where some people are coming out of sales environments and then becoming sales trainers. And that may be a viable way to pick up that particular competency. But it hasn't been the traditional pathway for most L&D people.
Thanks, Aaron. Nicole, what are your views on commercial acumen or for L&D or HR?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Jeevan, that it's been around since the beginning, the need for all of HR to build commercial acumen. In my personal experience, I find that the generalist HR community tends to be stronger with commercial acumen rather than pure learning / training professionals, and I think that just aligns with what Aaron's mentioned. I don't think it's a traditional pathway that they develop those sorts of skills. I think, the requirement these days and moving forward is for people to operate more strategically because of the amount of change and the fact that our roles are becoming higher order due to, in some instances, automation, but also because of the changes with the future of work. And so therefore, I think the whole notion of learning is obviously changing radically, and the expectations of what we do. So I think, it's sort of like commercial acumen goes hand in hand with also being more strategic as well, in my mind.
That's a good point. And while we've got you, Nicole, the next point in Fiona's slide is the future of work and enterprise social networks. And I think that's what I want to unpack. Starting with you, Nicole, is when we say that the skills and competencies are future of work. Maybe start with Fiona, since it's your slide, Fiona. Do you want to unpack future of work and what does it mean in terms of what are the skills required from the L&D person for the future of work?
Yes, thanks, Jeevan. The reason that I included that is because CEOs and business leaders these days, when they look to their learning professional, they want that person to be keeping an eye on the future for them. What does our workforce need to look like in 1, 2, 3 years' time? So it brings in a whole workforce planning element and thinking about the capabilities needed for the future. And what will the programs I'm building today be relevant in the short and medium term? How can I be, nimble and responsive? Points that have already been alluded to. So that's sort of what I meant around future of work. Do you want me to talk on the enterprise social networks?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So yes, we're seeing a real interest around leveraging internal networks for learning in person and through technology, and so organisations are looking to their learning professionals to really be that enabler for greater collaboration, and in many ways it can be a high impact yet quite cost effective way of transferring knowledge and greater shared learning.
Thank you. I think we'll kind of just move on to the next slides. I think just wanted to just check with Aaron in terms of future of work, because this is obviously a term that's been bandied around a lot everywhere, and the reality is that we've always had a future of work, even a couple of centuries ago. There's always been a future of work, and it's always been changing. Is there anything, Aaron, do you think there's anything kind of really dramatic happening that, all of a sudden future of work is a term that we need to pay attention to?
Yes, I think it is a dramatic change, and it certainly has been the focal point of probably, 80 to 90% of the conversations I'm having with heads of HR and CEOs all around the world. And I think that the real implication for L&D, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this one, because it's one of the things I noticed in the conversations that hasn't been mentioned at all, is the concept of career for employees. And where I'm kind of going with this is that when we talk to organizations about their preparedness for the future, and that includes the future of work, about 75% of them are saying that they're facing significant skill and capability gaps. So they're really concerned about their ability to meet the future needs of the organization and actually have the skills and capability needed to drive that. And then on the flip side, you've got about 70% of employees saying that they're actually not satisfied with the career development opportunities that they have. So that's what's happening in organizations. And then at a broader level, you've got society and governments becoming increasingly concerned about job losses related to automation and the future of work, and what do we do with this. So these conversations about lifelong learning, I think to me point to one of the biggest opportunities for the L&D profession is to get much better at identifying what are the future capabilities for the organization, and that goes to the point made just earlier about workforce planning. And then how do you actually link that to the career and growth needs of your employees? And I think there's a huge opportunity to make that link more specific and more direct, and provide employees with a pathway to meet the challenges of the future of work, and at the same time fill the capability gaps and needs that our businesses have. And it turns out that our research on learning application, particularly for digital learners, the biggest impact that we can have on the application of learning is to make application to an employee's career in terms of the learning that they're undertaking, make that easy. So if we can link learners to career development that also fills the gaps in our capabilities that we need for the future, I think that's the biggest opportunity that L&D has for the future.
Thank you. Nicole, over to you on your views on future of work and what does it mean for L&D?
Yeah, I think, obviously the way that we work, i.e. The notion of career and the increased percentage of contracting versus permanent workforce, the types of roles that we do, due to impact of automation and outsourcing or what have you, all changes how we work. And so I think, for me, it's incredibly important for learning professionals to be across what that future looks like, and to Aaron's point, which I totally agree with, to be able to think broadly and what has been an OD skill, to think through the business strategy, to think through globally what's happening, and therefore identify what is it that I need to do within learning to enable this business to succeed. And I agree absolutely with Aaron that there is incredible opportunity for learning. To his point, it's an absolute pain point in terms of the new and emerging skills and being across that for both CEOs and, also there's research around, just the fact that we have a huge gap comes up time and time again in terms of research. So I think great opportunity for learning professionals, but it's with a different set of skills for us, and and I think that's why these sorts of webinars are important, Jeevan, to highlight what those gaps are for everyone.
Thanks, Nicole. Look, just on the screen, you kind of see the recommendation from Josh Burson / Deloitte about the traditional learning organization capabilities and the new enhanced learning organizational capabilities, and they've kind of divided that into strategic core enablers, which is similar to something that we had brought out earlier a couple of years back, which is called the Next Gen L&D, and we shared this in the unconference a couple of years back, and which kind of builds around again the core of ADDIE project management, business partnership, and kind of adds agile design thinking and digital acumen, consulting, business acumen, and capability management as the new core capabilities, plus what we call scaffolding awareness from emerging techs, startup, entrepreneurship, knowledge management, workforce HR trends, and industry knowledge. I guess if the audience can just use their drawing tools and maybe just put a tick mark against the ones that they are most attracted to within that framework, that'll be fantastic. But the question is whether this new skill set, whether it's through the LearningCafe Next Gen framework or the Deloitte framework, is it going to be, how easy is it going to be for the current crop of L&D and HR professionals to make that move into the new skill sets? And the reason I ask this is that, because I just conducted this workshop on content curation last week, and I think the participants found it a little bit more difficult to learn content curation skills, because I think it was a lot of technology involved, intimate knowledge of technology. So maybe, Aaron, starting from you, is that while it's a nice picture to say, here are the current skill sets and this is where we need to go, and by the way, here's a pathway. Do you think it's going to be easy for people to pick up the new skills, which could be substantially different and more sophisticated in nature than what they used to?
I think the short answer is no. I don't think this is going to be easy. And because it's not going to be easy, and because of the ever-increasing pressure to build capability across the organization for the future, I suspect we'll find ways of getting around this. So I see two kind of scenarios. One is similar to something Josh Burson has also indicated, which is that we'll see hyper specialization occurring. So that may be one option, that these aspects of L&D are actually held across multiple people rather than in the single professional. And the other one is that maybe we increasingly look to the gig economy to pick up those areas of hyper-specialization. And I think that alludes to another point, which might be that L&D has traditionally been almost like a center of expertise. I suspect that you'll have L&D embedded into elements of the employee experience where it matters most as one of the future ways that the function itself is structured. So, longer way of saying I don't think this is easy at all.
Okay, good to hear that, because I have the same feeling, but I've been hearing very rosy pictures from everyone. But Nicole, how about you? Because I know, Nicole, in your last role, you did take the capability of the team from one level to the other level, and you've kind of gone through this process a couple of times now. So just wondering, any thoughts on how L&D can make the shift, or is it a case of kind of saying that we need new talent and new skill sets within L&D, i.e. new people?
Yeah, I think it's about evaluating your team to ascertain their own learning agility and mindset. I've certainly spoken to learning teams that are still in the dark in terms of the fact that they need new skills and that learning is changing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work still to do around making people realise that the whole notion of learning is changing significantly, and if learning professionals don't change, that I truly believe that they'll be made redundant at some stage because traditional training will cease to exist. When I completed a transformation in my last role, it was a combination, absolutely, of new skills, and it was very much a multidisciplinary team of learning and technology and even journalists due to the content curation skills. And so for me, having video producers and amazing social media communications people and and people that still had traditional learning but were also digitally savvy was absolutely key. And so I think for those leaders that want to transform, they need to critically analyse the current state of their team and do a mixture of both. Develop those that have the ability to learn these new skills and are keen, as well as buy new talent.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Nicole. I think this is probably we're coming to the finish of this marathon 2-hour session. The one question and one controversial question I want to ask, and it's open to all the panelists and the audience, is L&D's position kind of within HR. We had a lot of discussion saying that that L&D is probably better placed outside of HR for lots of reasons. I'm just wondering if, and look, I don't want to put you in the spot in case your HR boss is listening, but is anybody brave enough to agree with the notion that L&D should be taken out of HR and put somewhere else, probably under operations? Any thoughts on that, any of the panelists that are there?
Yes, I can hop in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty strong thought that...
Nicole, you go. You go.
Yeah, sorry, thanks, Dana. Yeah, no, I have a very strong view that it fits within the, whether you call it HR or employee experience area of the business. I've seen a couple of instances where it wasn't learning sitting outside, but OD was... But no, I just believe because of the importance of integration and interdependence, and really in my mind, we cease to become learning professionals and become focused on performance of individuals and performance of the company. So our roles broaden out and we develop broader HR people skills as part of that you know, part of that journey. So I think for me, absolutely, it should fit within the HR remit.
Okay, so that's one position. I take the other view, is that it should be outside of HR for a couple of reasons. HR have a very transactional mindset, in the sense that, you know, they kind of deal with employees once a year, twice a year. Payroll does it, you know, maybe once a fortnight. Learning is kind of an embedded activity in you know, pretty much every day. And I think that the conclusion we came to is that if we've got an enlightened HR leader, that works really well. But if the HR leader is not enlightened, it's a bit of a curse to be sitting under HR. So just wondering, Fiona, if you want to go with your comments.
Oh, just a very quick one. I was recently speaking to a global head of learning based in Paris. He's the head of a huge manufacturing company globally, and that was something that he said he could see in the future, that learning could split off the HR function. I'm not sure it has evolved that trend in and headquarters, but I just thought that was a
interesting. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's Aaron here. I think some parts of learning will be embedded in the business, but I think the critical need is to get L&D, you know, whatever's left of that function, to be as closely aligned with workforce planning as we possibly can get. So in order for that to happen at this stage, it has to stay in HR so that it's connected to both workforce planning and then broader organizational development activities. But I think big parts of day-to-day development will sit directly in the business.
Thank you very much, and I think this is where we finished. So I had a fantastic 4-panel 2-hour webinar, and you know, I'm not even close to being tired. So great discussion, great panelists. You've got the feedback form right in front of you, so if you could just fill that up. I'd like to know if this format kind of worked. But more importantly, I think I want to really thank the panel for you know, generating such an interesting conversation and such frank opinions, and it's always a pleasure to, you know, have people like yourself on LearningCafe webinar. So thanks, you know, again for your insights, and you know, we'll kind of have you hopefully next year when we run this next year. So we kind of look forward to having all of you, everybody who's participated and presented in the LearningCafe webinars and Capability Cafe webinars next year. So have a lovely Christmas break, and enjoy and rest, and we'll see you in 2018. So thanks, everyone. Yes, thank you. So disconnect. All you have to do is close your window. Panelists, thank you once again.